Every Tuesday at 3 p.m., a German shepherd approaches a heavily guarded Navy base. He doesn't want food. He doesn't want pets. He just stands at the fence, holding a faded blue canvas bag tightly in his teeth. The guards think he's just a stray. But one broken Navy SEAL recognizes that exact bag. It belonged to his best friend, a soldier who died in combat a year ago. What is inside? And why is this loyal dog trying to deliver mail to a ghost? Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from. And if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. The fluorescent lights of the administrative office at the naval base hummed a relentless, soul-crushing tune that Lieutenant Jake Vance was intimately familiar with. Jake, a towering active-duty Navy SEAL with broad shoulders, close-cropped dark hair, and deep green eyes that currently held the heavy weight of chronic exhaustion, stared at his computer screen. For a man who was highly trained to jump out of stealth helicopters at 30,000 feet in the dead of night, formatting an Excel spreadsheet about supply logistics felt like a very specific, highly classified form of psychological torture. He took a sip from his mug, instantly regretting it. The Navy's coffee tasted like someone had boiled a combat boot in battery acid, but he drank it anyway because it was the only thing keeping his brain functioning. It had been exactly 8 months since the disastrous raid in the Middle East, a mission that had left him with a slight limp in his left leg and a massive, invisible crater in his chest. He was officially on desk duty, a so-called cooling-off period mandated by the base psychiatrist who thought Jake needed time to process his trauma. Processing trauma, in Jake's experience, mostly consisted of avoiding the mess hall, dodging eye contact with his overly sympathetic teammates, and staring blankly at the ceiling of his bare barracks room until the sun came up. He was suffering from severe insomnia, a direct result of the relentless nightmares that ambushed him the second he closed his eyes. In those nightmares, he was always back in that suffocating, dust-choked alleyway, listening to the deafening roar of gunfire and the agonizing silence that followed. That was the silence that had swallowed Mark. Mark had been Jake's spotter, his best friend, and the most annoying optimist on the planet. Mark was a guy with unruly blonde hair, a goofy grin, and an irritating habit of cracking terrible dad jokes right before a breach. Jake carried the crushing burden of survivors' guilt every single day, convinced that he should have been the one in that alleyway, not Mark. "Hey, Vance, you're glaring at that monitor like it owes you money," a voice interrupted his dark thoughts. It was Petty Officer Miller, a young, overly energetic kid who hadn't yet learned that Jake was currently the base's unofficial ghost. "Just trying to mentally intimidate the spreadsheet into filling itself out, Miller," Jake replied dryly, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "It's a highly advanced tactical maneuver. You wouldn't understand." Miller let out a nervous chuckle, dropping a stack of personnel files on Jake's desk before quickly retreating. Jake sighed, pushing the files aside. He needed air. The stale, recycled oxygen of the office was making his skin itch. Grabbing his jacket, he slipped out the side door of the administrative building and began his solitary walk toward the outer perimeter of the base. It was a chilly Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where the sky hung low and grey, matching Jake's internal weather perfectly. He walked along the tall, imposing chain-link fence topped with razor wire that separated the military installation from the civilian town bordering it. The perimeter was usually dead quiet at this hour, offering him a rare moment of absolute peace away from the pitying looks of his commanding officers. As Jake leaned against a concrete barrier, letting the cool coastal breeze hit his face, he closed his eyes and tried a grounding exercise his therapist had suggested. He was supposed to name 3 things he could hear, see, and touch. He heard the distant crash of the ocean waves. He touched the rough, cold concrete beneath his palms. He opened his eyes to see a dog. Jake blinked, shaking his head to make sure his sleep-deprived brain wasn't projecting hallucinations. But the canine was still there, walking on the civilian side of the chain-link fence. It was an old German shepherd bearing the dignified, weathered look of a retired general. The dog had a greying muzzle, ears that stood up with sharp alertness, and a thick coat that looked like it hadn't been properly brushed in weeks. What immediately caught Jake's attention, however, was the dog's mouth. The shepherd's jaws were clamped firmly around the handle of a frayed, faded blue canvas bag. The dog walked with a deliberate, almost military precision, placing one paw in front of the other as if he were on a highly classified patrol mission. "Well, aren't you a strange sight?" Jake muttered to himself, his curiosity genuinely piqued for the first time in months. He took a few cautious steps toward the fence, making sure not to make any sudden movements that might spook the animal. But the old dog didn't look spooked at all. In fact, right at the exact moment the base clock tower chimed 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the German shepherd stopped dead in its tracks. The dog turned its head slowly, locking its gaze directly onto Jake. Jake froze. The dog's eyes were a piercing, intelligent shade of amber. There was no aggression in that stare, no fear, just an overwhelming sense of solemn duty and a profound, bone-deep sadness that Jake recognized instantly, because he saw the exact same look every time he looked in the mirror. For a long, silent minute, the towering Navy SEAL and the aging German shepherd just stared at each other through the diamond-shaped gaps of the steel fence. Jake felt a bizarre, inexplicable connection to the animal. It was as if two battle-weary veterans had suddenly recognized each other in a crowded room. "What's in the bag, buddy?" Jake asked softly, his voice barely louder than the wind. "You delivering classified intelligence, or just carrying your favorite squeaky toys?" The dog did not wag its tail. It simply blinked slowly, let out a soft, low huff of air through its nose, and then turned away. With the blue bag still gripped tightly in its teeth, the shepherd resumed its slow, steady march down the perimeter line, eventually disappearing into the thick fog that was beginning to roll in from the coast. Jake stood by the fence long after the dog had vanished from sight. For the first time in almost a year, his mind wasn't entirely consumed by the echoing gunfire of his nightmares or the agonizing memory of Mark's absence. Instead, his thoughts were completely occupied by the mysterious canine postman. Who did the dog belong to? Where did it come from? And why on earth did it look like it was carrying the weight of the world in that beat-up blue bag? A tiny, unfamiliar spark of life flickered in Jake's hollow chest. He checked his watch. Tuesday, 3:05 p.m. He made a silent promise to himself right then and there. Next week, he was going to find out exactly who this four-legged soldier was. The following Tuesday arrived with a thick layer of marine layer fog clinging to the naval base, mirroring the persistent fog in Lieutenant Jake Vance's own mind. Jake, the broad-shouldered SEAL with haunted green eyes, had spent the last 7 days essentially vibrating with a strange, quiet anticipation. His first stop that afternoon was the base mess hall, where he encountered Chief Cookie Henderson, a burly bald man with a perpetually stained white apron and a terrifyingly cheerful demeanor. "What can I do for you, Lieutenant?" Cookie boomed, wiping his large hands on a towel. "You look like you need a decent hot meal instead of whatever protein paste you special ops guys usually eat in the dark." Jake managed a tight, polite smile, something he hadn't done in months. "Actually, Chief, I just need a couple of those sausages you're grilling, and maybe a clean plastic bowl. It's for a highly classified special project." Cookie raised a skeptical, bushy eyebrow, but handed over a small foil-wrapped package and a bowl without further questions. Armed with his questionable culinary bribe, Jake made his way back to the perimeter fence. He checked his tactical watch. It was exactly 2 minutes to 3 o'clock. He leaned against the cold chain link, the foil packet warming his calloused hand, and waited. True to his silent internal clock, the old German shepherd appeared out of the mist precisely at 3. The dog, with his greying muzzle and alert, amber eyes, walked with the same deliberate, slow pacing as before. And just like last week, the frayed blue canvas bag was clamped firmly in his jaws. "Hey there, old-timer," Jake called out softly, his deep voice carrying through the fog. "I brought you some premium, military-grade mystery meat. Thought you might be tired of whatever you're finding out there in the civilian world." Jake unwrapped the sausages, the savory smell cutting through the damp air, and carefully slid them through a small gap at the bottom of the fence, along with the bowl filled with fresh water. He backed away slowly, sitting cross-legged on the wet grass to show he wasn't a threat. The shepherd paused. He looked at the sausages, his wet nose twitching slightly, and then looked up at Jake. For a long moment, the dog seemed to weigh his options. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped forward. He lowered his massive head, delicately picked up a sausage without ever letting go of the blue bag's strap, and ate it in 2 quick bites. He lapped up some water, gave Jake one last, unreadable look, and continued his march down the fence line. Jake smiled, a genuine, albeit small, upward curve of his lips that felt completely foreign to his face. "I'll see you next week, Tuesday," he whispered, officially giving the mysterious canine a name. As the weeks turned into a full month, this Tuesday afternoon rendezvous became the single most important event in Jake's otherwise hollow existence. His nights were still an absolute battlefield. The insomnia had worsened to the point where he dreaded closing his eyes. Whenever he drifted off, he was immediately pulled back to the suffocating heat of the Middle East, hearing the deafening chatter of insurgent gunfire and seeing the blinding dust settle over the spot where his spotter, Mark, had fallen. Mark's final unfinished sentence would echo in Jake's ears, jerking him awake with a heart pounding fast enough to crack his ribs. Jake would spend the rest of the night sitting on the edge of his cot, staring at his trembling hands, drowning in a toxic cocktail of survivor's guilt and profound isolation. But then Tuesday would roll around. Knowing that the old German shepherd was out there, dutifully carrying out his inexplicable mission, gave Jake an anchor. He started buying higher quality treats from the civilian pet store off base, sneaking them past the front gate guards. Tuesday gradually grew more comfortable, eventually allowing Jake to reach his fingers through the chain link to gently scratch behind the dog's soft ears. Yet, no matter how relaxed the animal became, he never once dropped the blue bag. It was always there, held tightly in his mouth, a sacred duty that he absolutely refused to abandon. Jake often found himself talking to the dog during these quiet moments, pouring out fragments of his fractured mind to a listener who couldn't judge or offer hollow platitudes. "You know, Tuesday, you and I are a lot alike," Jake murmured one afternoon, resting his forehead against the cold metal of the fence while the dog chewed on a premium beef jerky stick. "We're both just carrying around a bunch of heavy baggage, walking the exact same perimeter, waiting for a mission to end. You're a good listener, buddy. Better than the base shrink anyway." The turning point in their silent brotherhood came during the second week of November, when a massive, unseasonal storm slammed into the coast. The sky turned a bruised, violent purple by mid-morning, unleashing torrential rain and howling winds that rattled the thick windows of the administrative building. The base commander ordered all non-essential personnel to stay indoors, and even the toughest, most stubborn Marines were huddled inside the barracks. Jake sat at his desk, staring blankly at the digital clock on his computer monitor. It was 2:45 p.m. The rain was lashing against the glass in angry horizontal sheets. There was no way Tuesday would be out in this weather. It was a freezing downpour, the kind that chilled a man to the bone in a matter of minutes. But as the clock clicked to 2:55 p.m., a restless, anxious energy gripped Jake's chest. He couldn't just sit there. Grabbing his heavy-duty waterproof tactical jacket, he ignored the bewildered shouts of Petty Officer Miller and bolted out the door into the raging storm. The wind nearly knocked him backward, the freezing rain feeling like sharp needles against his face. He sprinted toward their usual meeting spot at the perimeter fence, his combat boots sinking deep into the rapidly forming mud. He reached the fence, wiping the water from his eyes, and peered through the chain link into the civilian side. Nothing. Just a wall of grey rain and violently bending trees. Jake checked his watch. 3:02 p.m. His heart sank, a heavy, cold weight settling in his stomach. He was being ridiculous, risking pneumonia for a stray dog that had the common sense to stay out of a hurricane. He turned to leave, but a slight movement caught his eye. Emerging from the torrential curtain of rain, head bowed low against the fierce wind, was Tuesday. The old dog was completely drenched, his thick coat plastered to his shivering body, making him look frail and painfully thin. Yet, despite the visible exhaustion and the freezing downpour, Tuesday was still marching, and he was still holding the blue bag. Jake's breath hitched in his throat. The dog reached their spot and collapsed onto his haunches, his entire body trembling violently from the cold. He looked up at Jake, his amber eyes clouded with misery but shining with stubborn determination. "You stubborn, crazy old soldier," Jake breathed, panic rising in his chest. The dog was going to freeze to death out there. Jake looked wildly up and down the fence line. There was a small drainage ditch running beneath the fence about 20 yards down, partially washed out by the heavy rain. Without thinking about base security protocols or the potential for a severe reprimand, Jake ran to the ditch, dropped onto his stomach in the freezing mud, and forcefully squeezed his broad shoulders under the razor-sharp bottom edge of the chain link. He scraped his back, ignoring the sharp sting, and scrambled up on the civilian side. He rushed over to the shivering dog, immediately shrugging off his heavy, insulated tactical jacket. Tuesday flinched slightly as Jake knelt beside him, but he didn't run away. Jake gently draped the large, warm jacket over the dog's trembling frame, pulling it snug around his neck to shield him from the biting wind. "I got you, buddy. I got you right here," Jake whispered, his voice cracking against the wind. He wrapped his strong arms around the jacket-clad dog, pulling Tuesday close against his own chest to share his body heat. For a tense moment, the shepherd remained stiff. Then, slowly, Tuesday let out a long, shuddering sigh. He rested his wet, graying chin heavily onto Jake's shoulder, the blue bag still dangling from his jaws, pressing softly against Jake's back. As the storm raged around them, the towering, broken Navy SEAL and the loyal, aging dog sat huddled together in the mud, finding the exact kind of warmth and safety they both had thought was lost forever. The aftermath of the torrential storm marked a profound shift in the silent alliance between Lieutenant Jake Vance and the aging German shepherd. Tuesday was no longer just a mysterious visitor on the other side of a chain-link fence. He had become a tangible, breathing lifeline. Over the next few weeks, their Tuesday afternoon ritual evolved from a cautious exchange of high-grade beef jerky into genuine companionship. Tuesday finally allowed Jake to reach through the metal diamonds of the fence and run his calloused hands over the dog's thick, graying coat. Jake would carefully check for ticks, gently massage the dog's stiff arthritic hips, and inspect the minor scratches Tuesday acquired from his unknown travels. In return, Tuesday would lean his heavy weight against the fence, letting out a low, rumbling groan of absolute contentment. The physical contact, as simple as it was, worked a bizarre kind of magic on Jake's fractured psyche. For the first time since that disastrous deployment, Jake began to sleep. The suffocating nightmares of the dusty alleyway didn't vanish completely, but their sharp edges were significantly dulled. When he woke up in a cold sweat, instead of drowning in survivor's guilt over Mark's death, he would focus on the memory of Tuesday's steady, rhythmic breathing against his chest during the storm. It was a small anchor, but it was enough to keep him from drifting away into the dark. Driven by a newfound sense of purpose, Jake decided it was time to play detective. Who exactly owned this incredibly disciplined, deeply melancholic canine postman? On his days off, Jake ventured into the small, sleepy coastal town that bordered the naval base. He visited the local hardware store, the diner that smelled perpetually of bacon grease and stale coffee, and the only veterinary clinic within a 20-mile radius. He described Tuesday perfectly. An older German shepherd, highly trained, walks with a slight limp in the hind legs and carries a beaten-up blue canvas bag like it holds the nuclear launch codes. The results were universally disappointing. "Buddy, we got a lot of stray dogs around here, but none of them are carrying luggage," chuckled old man Higgins at the hardware store, a man whose overalls looked as ancient as his dusty shop. The local vet, a stern woman with sharp glasses and a heart of gold, checked her extensive records, but found no match for a dog fitting Tuesday's specific quirks. It was as if Tuesday was a phantom, a four-legged ghost that materialized exclusively on Tuesday afternoons just to check on a broken Navy SEAL. Jake even considered checking the base's security footage, but he knew Petty Officer Miller would ask too many questions, and Jake wasn't ready to share his strange coping mechanism with the rest of the world just yet. So, he accepted the mystery. Tuesday was his secret, a silent guardian who asked for nothing but a cheap sausage and a few minutes of quiet understanding. The delicate equilibrium they had built was shattered on an unseasonably warm afternoon in early December. Jake was sitting on the grass, his back against the fence, casually telling Tuesday about how Chief Cookie had recently attempted to make a meatloaf that tasted remarkably like tactical drywall. Tuesday was sitting attentively on the civilian side, the blue bag resting gently on his massive front paws. The peace was absolute, right up until the moment the base's emergency siren test triggered. It wasn't a drill they ran often, and it was undeniably deafening. A shrill, mechanical wail suddenly ripped through the quiet air, echoing off the concrete bunkers and vibrating the very ground beneath them. Tuesday, who usually possessed nerves of absolute steel, panicked. The sudden, overwhelming noise must have triggered some deep-seated canine instinct or a hidden trauma. The old dog scrambled backward, his paws slipping frantically on the damp grass. In his haste to grab his precious blue bag and retreat, Tuesday misjudged the distance. The faded canvas strap snagged viciously on a low-hanging barb of the chain-link fence. Tuesday yanked hard, desperate to escape the noise. There was a loud, sickening sound of tearing fabric. The blue bag ripped wide open, spilling its secret contents onto the muddy ground just as the siren abruptly cut off, leaving behind a ringing, heavy silence. "Hey, it's okay, buddy. It's just a test. It's over," Jake called out quickly, scrambling to his knees to comfort the trembling dog. But Tuesday wasn't looking at Jake. The dog was staring down at the scattered items with a look of absolute devastation, whining softly in the back of his throat. Jake leaned closer to the fence, his eyes scanning the debris. He expected to see dog toys, maybe some old bones or scavenged food. Instead, his heart stopped dead in his chest. Scattered across the wet grass were small, brightly colored envelopes and several pieces of folded construction paper. Jake reached his fingers through the fence, carefully pulling one of the papers toward him. It was a crayon drawing. It depicted a tall man in a green uniform holding hands with a little girl and a large, brown and black dog. The artwork was charmingly clumsy, clearly drawn by a child. Jake's trembling hands then picked up one of the envelopes. It was sealed with a slightly crooked sticker of a smiling cartoon dinosaur. Written across the front, in messy, oversized child's handwriting, were the words, "To Daddy Mark, in heaven." All the air left Jake's lungs in a violent rush. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He knew that handwriting. He had seen it on the letters Mark used to pin up on the wall of their shared bunk in the desert. Mark's 7-year-old daughter, Lily. He looked back at the drawing, at the green uniform, the little girl, and the dog. The dog. The puzzle pieces slammed together with a force that made Jake dizzy. Tuesday wasn't a stray. Tuesday wasn't a ghost. Tuesday was Mark's family dog. The loyal shepherd hadn't been wandering aimlessly. He had been diligently carrying little Lily's letters to the closest military base he could find, faithfully delivering messages to a father who was never coming home. Jake slumped against the fence, the rough metal biting into his back, burying his face in his hands as the first real sob he had allowed himself in 8 months tore violently from his throat. The shrill echo of the base siren had long faded into the damp December air, but a different kind of deafening roar now filled Lieutenant Jake Vance's ears. It was the sound of his own pulse, hammering wildly against his ribs as he stared at the scattered, rain-splattered letters. His large, calloused hands that were trained to dismantle explosive devices with surgical precision, shook violently as he gathered the brightly colored envelopes and the crayon drawing from the wet grass. Tuesday stood nearby, whining softly in distress, his amber eyes fixed on the ruined blue canvas bag that lay tangled in the chain-link fence. Jake carefully wiped a smear of mud from the drawing of the tall man in the green uniform. "To Daddy Mark in heaven," the messy handwriting declared, innocent and utterly devastating. Jake carefully tucked the letters and the drawing into the inside pocket of his tactical jacket, pressing them close to his chest, as if trying to protect them from the harsh reality of the world. He then gently unhooked the torn blue bag from the fence, handing it back to the old German shepherd. Tuesday took the frayed fabric in his mouth with a solemn nod, though his posture was defeated, his sacred duty interrupted. For the first time, instead of turning back toward the base, Jake watched the dog turn toward the civilian town. A heavy, undeniable truth settled over Jake's broad shoulders. He couldn't just stand there anymore. He had to know where the dog was going. He had to follow the trail. Slipping his jacket back on, Jake began a silent, tactical pursuit. He maintained a safe distance, utilizing the skills that had made him an elite Navy SEAL to track the aging canine through the winding streets of the coastal town. The fog had rolled back in, providing a grey, melancholic cover for his covert mission. As he walked, Jake's mind became a chaotic battlefield of memories and crushing guilt. He remembered the stifling heat of the tent they shared in the Middle East, the smell of gun oil and stale sweat. He remembered Mark, his spotter and best friend, sitting on his cot and carefully packing a photo of a blonde woman and a little girl into his tactical vest. "If things go sideways out there, Vance," Mark had said, his usually goofy grin replaced by a rare solemn seriousness, "you promise me you'll check on Sarah and Lily. You make sure they're okay. Promise me, man." Jake had promised. He had sworn on his life. But when the dust settled in that horrific alleyway, and Jake woke up in a military hospital surrounded by beeping machines and sympathetic nurses, he had done the exact opposite. He had cowardly retreated into his own trauma. The thought of knocking on Sarah's door, of looking into the eyes of the woman whose husband he had failed to bring home, had been more terrifying than any combat mission he had ever faced. For an entire year, he had hidden behind the formidable walls of the naval base, drowning in his own survivor's guilt, leaving a grieving widow and a fatherless child to navigate the wreckage alone. The weight of his broken promise felt like physical lead in his boots as he followed Tuesday further away from the town center and into a run-down, forgotten suburb. Tuesday finally turned down a cracked, weed-choked sidewalk and stopped in front of a small, dilapidated house. The paint on the exterior walls was peeling off in large, sad flakes, and the front lawn was a chaotic mess of overgrown grass and scattered broken toys. Jake immediately sought cover, pressing his large frame behind the thick trunk of an old gnarled oak tree across the street. He held his breath, watching intently. The front door of the house creaked open, and a woman stepped out onto the porch. It was Sarah. Jake recognized her instantly from the photos Mark used to proudly display, but the woman standing before him looked drastically different from the smiling wife in those pictures. Sarah, in her early 30s, looked utterly exhausted. Her dark hair was pulled back into a messy, careless bun, and she wore faded blue nursing scrubs that looked a size too big for her thinning frame. Deep, dark circles bruised the delicate skin under her eyes, speaking volumes of sleepless nights and relentless, bone-deep fatigue. She was carrying a heavy laundry basket, her shoulders slumped under the invisible weight of single motherhood and profound grief. Jake felt a sharp, physical ache in his chest. Mark's vibrant, beautiful wife was drowning, and Jake had been too entirely consumed by his own misery to throw her a lifeline. "Tuesday, you're back!" A high-pitched, incredibly joyful voice suddenly shattered the heavy silence of the neighborhood. The screen door slammed open, and a little girl burst onto the porch. It was Lily. She was 7 years old, a tiny hurricane of boundless energy with Mark's unmistakable bright blonde hair and his infectious, gap-toothed smile. She wore a mismatched outfit of a pink tutu and a superhero t-shirt, completely oblivious to the melancholy that surrounded her home. Lily bounded down the wooden steps, ignoring her mother's tired warning to be careful, and threw her small arms around the old German shepherd's thick neck. Tuesday dropped the torn blue canvas bag and leaned his heavy weight against the little girl, his tail giving a weak, rhythmic thump against the cracked concrete of the walkway. Jake gripped the rough bark of the oak tree so hard his knuckles turned stark white. He strained his ears to hear the interaction, his heart hammering in his throat. Lily knelt on the ground, burying her face in Tuesday's damp fur. "Did you go see him, Tuesday?" she asked, her voice ringing with a pure, heartbreaking innocence. "Did you take my letters to Daddy? Did he get the drawing with the dinosaur sticker?" Tuesday simply let out a low, soft whine, licking a smudge of dirt off the little girl's cheek. Lily pulled back, her bright blue eyes searching the dog's unreadable face. "Did he say anything back? Did he send a message for me and Mommy? He promised he'd send a sign." Sarah dropped the laundry basket onto the porch with a soft thud. She hurried down the steps, pulling Lily into a tight, protective embrace. "Oh, sweetie," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking with suppressed tears. "Daddy loves your letters. I'm sure he got them. Tuesday is a very good postman." But Lily looked down at the torn, empty blue bag, a flicker of confusion and profound disappointment crossing her young features. "The bag is broken, Mommy, and it's empty. He didn't send anything back." Standing hidden in the shadows of the old oak tree, Jake Vance finally broke. The formidable, battle-hardened Navy SEAL, a man who had survived explosions and enemy fire, completely crumbled. A single hot tear escaped his eye, tracing a clean line down his weathered cheek, quickly followed by another. He pulled the brightly colored envelopes from his jacket pocket, staring at the crooked dinosaur sticker. Tuesday hadn't just been carrying letters. The dog had been carrying the fragile, desperate hope of a little girl who refused to let her father go. Jake had spent the last 12 months running away from the ghosts of his past, but standing there, watching Mark's family desperately clinging to the memory of the man he couldn't save, Jake finally understood the truth. He couldn't hide behind the chain-link fence of the naval base anymore. He couldn't let an aging German shepherd carry the burden that rightfully belonged to him. He wiped his face with the back of his trembling hand, his jaw setting with a newfound unbreakable resolve. He was going to keep his promise. It was a year late, but he was finally going to step out of the shadows. The fluorescent lights of the administrative office were a distant memory, as Lieutenant Jake Vance, a towering Navy SEAL with haunted green eyes and a freshly pressed dress blue uniform, stood before the chipped wooden door of a dilapidated suburban house. The brass buttons on his chest felt heavier than a full combat load, and the neat stack of crayon-drawn letters in his trembling hand felt like an unexploded ordnance. Tuesday, the aging German shepherd with a greying muzzle and alert amber eyes sat patiently by his side. The dog occasionally nudged Jake's polished black shoes with a wet nose, as if to silently bark, "Get on with it, soldier. We have a mission to complete." Jake took a deep, shuddering breath, the exact kind of breath he usually reserved for jumping out of stealth helicopters into hostile territory, and finally raised his scarred knuckles to knock on the peeling paint of the door. The door creaked open, whining on rusted hinges to reveal Sarah. She was a woman in her early 30s, wearing faded blue nursing scrubs, her dark hair pulled into a messy, careless bun. Her brown eyes carried a profound, exhausted sadness that instantly punched the air right out of Jake's lungs. When her gaze shifted from the dog to Jake's imposing uniform, she froze entirely, the color draining completely from her face. For a terrifying, stretched-out second, Jake thought she might slam the door in his face or collapse onto the porch. "Ma'am." "Sarah," Jake began, his deep, gravelly voice cracking slightly under the immense pressure of a year's worth of guilt. "I'm Lieutenant Jake Vance. I was Mark's spotter, his teammate, his friend." Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, a stifled, broken gasp escaping her lips. She didn't yell, and she didn't turn the coward away. Instead, her eyes filled with hot, welling tears, and she pushed the screen door open wider, silently inviting the living ghost of her husband's past into her sanctuary. Jake stepped inside, the house smelling faintly of cinnamon, cheap laundry detergent, and old books, a stark and comforting contrast to the sterile metallic scent of the naval base. They sat in a small, worn-out living room, dotted with scattered children's toys and framed photographs of Mark. Everywhere Jake looked, he saw the blonde, goofy grinning seal who had been the absolute center of this family's universe. Jake, feeling entirely too large and dangerous for the delicate, faded floral sofa, leaned forward and gently placed the brightly colored envelopes and the crayon drawing on the scratched coffee table. Sarah stared at the letters in absolute bewilderment, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I found these," Jake explained softly, gesturing toward Tuesday, who had promptly sprawled out on the braided rug, claiming the center of the room like a tired king. "Actually, to be precise, Tuesday brought them to me. Every Tuesday afternoon at exactly 3 o'clock for the past month, this stubborn old mule has been marching up to the perimeter fence of the naval base carrying a blue canvas bag locked in his teeth. He absolutely refused to drop it. I've been bribing him with top-tier military mess hall sausages just to get him to let me pet his head. Yesterday, the base siren spooked him. The bag ripped on the fence, and I saw Lily's letters. He's been trying to deliver them to Mark." Sarah let out a sound that was a heartbreaking mix of a laugh and a sob, looking down at the aging German shepherd with pure adoration. "He always disappears on Tuesday afternoons," she whispered, shaking her head in sheer disbelief. "Mark used to take him to the base on Tuesdays for agility training before the deployment. He never forgot his routine. He never forgot his dad." Suddenly, a tiny hurricane of blonde hair and pink tulle exploded into the room. Lily, the 7-year-old girl with a bright, gap-toothed smile and an incredible surplus of kinetic energy, stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the giant man in the shiny uniform sitting on her couch. "Are you a policeman?" she asked, tilting her head curiously, completely devoid of fear. Jake offered a small, incredibly awkward smile, feeling completely out of his depth with the child. "No, kiddo. I'm a Navy SEAL. I worked with your dad." Lily's bright blue eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. She looked at Jake, then at the letters on the table, and finally at Tuesday, who enthusiastically thumped his tail against the floor. "I knew it!" Lily squealed triumphantly, bouncing on her toes with absolute conviction. Tuesday took my letters to heaven, and Daddy read them, and he sent you. You're the giant angel Daddy sent to fix the leaky roof." Jake blinked, completely thrown off guard by the flawless, bulletproof logic of a 7-year-old. Sarah let out a wet, genuine laugh, wiping her eyes as the heavy tension in the room shattered into something remarkably warm. "Lily, honey, Lieutenant Vance isn't an angel," she corrected gently, though a genuine smile finally reached her tired eyes. "Well, I definitely don't have wings, and my halo is severely busted," Jake rumbled, a rare, actual chuckle escaping his chest for the first time in a year. "But I am pretty handy with a wrench. If your dad sent me to fix the roof, I guess that's my new classified mission." The light-hearted, humorous moment slowly faded as Lily skipped off to the kitchen to fetch her new angel a grape juice box, leaving Jake and Sarah alone with the unspoken grief in the room. Jake swallowed hard, the familiar crushing weight of survivor's guilt pressing heavily down on his lungs. But looking at Sarah's gentle, remarkably forgiving face, he realized he simply couldn't carry the burden alone anymore. He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a small, metallic object attached to a beaded chain. It was Mark's dog tag, stained with a faint, faded rust color that Jake had never been able to wash away, a brutal reminder of the alleyway. He held it out to Sarah, his hand trembling uncontrollably. Her breath hitched violently, and she reached out with shaking hands to take the cold metal, pressing it instantly and fiercely against her heart. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," Jake whispered, his voice breaking completely, thick with unwept tears. "I promised him I would check on you. I promised I would be here for you both. I was so terrified to look at you and know I was the one who came back instead of him. I was a coward." Sarah didn't offer empty platitudes or tell him it wasn't his fault, because they both knew the reality of war. Instead, she closed the physical and emotional distance between them, wrapping her arms tightly around the broad, shaking shoulders of the broken soldier. It was an embrace of profound understanding, shared agony, and absolute forgiveness. "You're here now, Jake," she sobbed softly into his shoulder, the year of agonizing, pent-up grief finally breaking like a massive dam. "You brought him back to us today. You're here now, and that's all that matters." Jake closed his eyes, hugging her back with a fierce, protective grip, and for the first time in an entire year, the deafening, haunting roar of the Middle Eastern gunfire in his mind went completely, beautifully silent, replaced by the quiet, steady rhythm of a healing heart. Lieutenant Jake Vance, a towering, broad-shouldered Navy SEAL who usually packed his entire life into a single olive-drab duffel bag, found himself entirely out of his element as he carried a suspiciously wobbly cardboard box into his new civilian apartment. He had officially requested permission to move off the naval base, trading the sterile, predictable confines of the military barracks for a cramped second-floor walk-up exactly 3 blocks away from Sarah and Lily's house. His new living room contained only a mattress on the floor, a coffee maker that sounded like a dying tractor, and a framed photograph of Mark. Jake didn't need much. His primary objective was proximity. He spent every single off-duty hour at the small, peeling house down the street, systematically working his way through a massive checklist of home repairs that Mark had never gotten around to finishing. Jake approached, fixing the dangerously leaky roof with the same intense, life-or-death focus he usually reserved for defusing improvised explosive devices. He wore a tool belt like a tactical rig, terrifying the local hardware store clerks by demanding the exact tensile strength of their roofing nails. Inside the house, a profound, beautiful shift had occurred. Tuesday, the aging, graying German shepherd who used to march to the military perimeter with absolute dedication had officially retired. When 3 o'clock rolled around on Tuesday afternoons, the old dog no longer grabbed the torn blue canvas bag. Instead, Tuesday would simply let out a long, contented sigh and rest his heavy chin on Jake's steel-toed boots, apparently deciding that since the giant soldier had finally arrived, the mail delivery route was permanently cancelled. Jake's horrific, suffocating PTSD nightmares, the ones that used to leave him gasping for air in cold sweats, slowly began to lose their grip. They were gradually replaced by the chaotic, incredibly loud reality of a 7-year-old girl. Lily, a tiny blonde tornado of pure joy, had decided that her giant angel was her new best friend. Jake found himself executing highly classified tactical maneuvers like teaching her how to ride a pink bicycle without training wheels. Keep your eyes on the horizon, secure your perimeter, and maintain a steady velocity. Jake barked in a serious command voice while jogging alongside the wobbly bike, causing Sarah, a resilient woman whose dark eyes were finally beginning to sparkle with genuine warmth again, to laugh out loud from the porch. "Jake, she's riding a bicycle, not flying a stealth bomber," Sarah teased, wiping a stray smudge of motor oil off his cheek with a soft towel when he finally returned to the porch, out of breath and smiling. It was the most perfect, ordinary afternoon Jake had experienced in years, making him realize that this chaotic little house, with its patched roof and laughing inhabitants, was quickly becoming the only place on Earth where he actually felt like he could breathe. The peaceful domestic rhythm they had built was violently tested late one Friday night when a freak, aggressive coastal squall slammed into the neighborhood without any prior warning from the local meteorologists. Jake was sitting alone in his sparse apartment, reading a battered paperback, when the wind suddenly howled like a wounded animal, instantly knocking out the power grid for the entire block. Plunged into absolute darkness, Jake didn't flinch. His SEAL training immediately kicked into high gear. He grabbed his heavy-duty tactical flashlight and stepped toward the window just in time to hear a terrifying, thunderous crack echoing from exactly 3 blocks away. It wasn't the sound of thunder, it was the sickening, catastrophic sound of massive, ancient wood splintering under immense pressure. Jake's blood ran completely ice-cold. He knew that sound, and he knew exactly where the massive, rotted oak tree stood. He didn't bother grabbing a jacket. He sprinted out of his apartment, his combat boots pounding a frantic rhythm against the rain-slicked pavement, ignoring the violently whipping branches and the horizontal sheets of freezing rain. When he rounded the corner to Sarah's street, his worst fear was realized. The giant oak tree had completely snapped at its base, crashing down with devastating force right onto the front corner of Sarah's house, completely crushing the porch and collapsing a section of the living room ceiling. "Sarah! Lily!" Jake roared, his deep voice desperately cutting through the howling storm. He reached the chaotic wreckage, sweeping his flashlight beam over the shattered wood and exposed, sparking electrical wires. The front door was completely warped and jammed shut by the sheer weight of the fallen trunk. Inside, he could hear the frantic, terrified barking of Tuesday and the high-pitched screams of a frightened child. Panic was not an option. Jake Vance transformed back into an elite operator breaching a hostile compound. He quickly scanned the debris, located a heavy, solid steel crowbar from his own scattered toolbox on the lawn, and wedged it violently into the warped doorframe. Utilizing every ounce of his massive, muscular frame, he threw his entire body weight against the lever, muscles screaming in protest until the hinges shrieked and the door violently gave way, splintering inward. Jake dove into the dark, incredibly dusty living room, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the terrifying haze of pulverized drywall and rain. "Jake! We're back here!" Sarah cried out from the narrow hallway leading to the kitchen, her voice trembling with absolute terror. Jake scrambled over the crushed remains of the floral sofa, finding Sarah crouched protectively over a sobbing Lily, with Tuesday standing bravely over both of them, his graying teeth bared at the collapsing ceiling. "I've got you. I've got you both," Jake stated, his voice a steady, unbreakable anchor of calm in the absolute chaos. Without a single moment of hesitation, he scooped the crying 7-year-old up into his left arm, holding her tightly against his chest, and securely grabbed Sarah's trembling hand with his right. "Tuesday, on me! Move!" he commanded. The old German shepherd didn't need to be told twice, instantly pressing his flank against Jake's leg. Navigating the treacherous, unstable debris as the house groaned ominously under the weight of the tree, Jake guided his new family out into the freezing, pouring rain, shielding them with his own broad body from the falling shrapnel of the ruined house. He didn't stop running until they were safely inside the solid, undamaged brick walls of his own small apartment. Dripping wet, covered in sawdust and breathing heavily, Jake dropped to his knees, wrapping a thick wool blanket tightly around Sarah, Lily, and the shivering dog. Lily immediately buried her tear-streaked face into his neck, her tiny hands gripping his soaked t-shirt like a vice, while Sarah leaned heavily against his shoulder, letting out a long, ragged breath of pure relief. "You're safe," Jake whispered fiercely into the dark room, his strong arms wrapping around all three of them in a protective, unbreakable seal. "I swear on my life, I will always keep you safe." The old German shepherd let out a soft, approving huff, resting his wet chin on Jake's knee, confirming that the broken soldier had finally, truly found his way home. The arrival of spring brought a tentative warmth to the small coastal town, thawing the remnants of the harsh winter and bringing a renewed sense of life to the Vance Miller extended family. For 7-year-old Lily, whose bright blonde hair and perpetual gap-toothed smile could outshine the sun itself, the changing season meant only one highly anticipated event: the annual Family Day picnic at Oak Creek Elementary School. For weeks, the little girl had been working on a top-secret art project at the kitchen table, shielding her construction paper and glitter glue with the intense operational security of a classified military briefing whenever Lieutenant Jake Vance walked into the room. Jake, the towering Navy SEAL whose hardened, muscular exterior had entirely softened under the influence of this tiny, joyful hurricane, pretended not to notice the excessive amount of pink glitter currently embedded in the fur of Tuesday, the aging German shepherd. Tuesday simply sneezed, a sparkling cloud erupting from his greying muzzle, and went back to sleep on the rug. Lily was making a special hand-drawn invitation for Jake, meticulously colouring a giant, slightly disproportionate superhero with a green uniform and a very square jaw. However, the innocent joy of her secret mission was brutally shattered during the Tuesday morning recess period. Lily was sitting on a wooden bench near the playground edge, proudly reviewing her glittery masterpiece when a shadow fell over her. It was Tommy, a hulking 5th grader with a mean streak and a notoriously loud mouth, flanked by 2 of his equally unpleasant friends. Tommy snatched the carefully folded construction paper right out of Lily's small hands, holding it high above his head where she couldn't reach it. "Who are you giving this to, Lily?" Tommy sneered, his voice dripping with cruel, childish malice. "You can't bring a dad to Family Day. Everybody knows you don't even have a dad. He's dead." The incredibly callous words hit the little girl like a physical blow, instantly shattering the fragile peace her family had worked so hard to build over the past year. When Tommy maliciously ripped the green superhero drawing directly down the middle and tossed the pieces into a nearby muddy puddle, Lily didn't scream or fight back. A profound, overwhelming wave of panic and absolute heartbreak washed over her tiny frame. Tears instantly flooded her bright blue eyes, blurring her vision entirely. Unable to process the cruelty, Lily turned on her light-up sneakers and sprinted blindly away from the playground. She didn't run toward the safety of the teacher's lounge or the front gates. Driven by pure, unadulterated distress, she bolted past the boundary fence and disappeared straight into the Whispering Woods, a dense, sprawling forest that bordered the back edge of the school property, entirely ignoring the warning shouts of a playground monitor. The situation escalated from a playground incident to a full-blown crisis in a matter of 20 terrifying minutes, when a sudden, violent spring downpour abruptly opened up over the town, transforming the normally manageable woods into a dark, treacherous, and freezing maze. Sarah, wearing her faded blue nursing scrubs and looking paler than a ghost, was frantically pacing the muddy edge of the tree line alongside Chief Miller, an older, heavily wrinkled local police officer who looked entirely overwhelmed by the situation. "The rain is washing away any tracks she might have left, Sarah, and my dogs can't pick up a scent in this downpour," Chief Miller explained gently but grimly, water dripping from the brim of his wide hat. "We have a search perimeter set up, but this forest stretches for 10 miles into the foothills." Sarah didn't wait to hear the rest of his tactical assessment. Her hands shaking violently, she pulled her cell phone from her pocket and hit the number that had become her absolute lifeline. Jake Vance was in the middle of patching a section of drywall in Sarah's living room when his phone buzzed. The moment he heard Sarah's hysterical, tear-choked voice scream, "Jake, she's in the woods. They can't find her. She ran away," the man completely ceased to be a civilian handyman. The switch flipped instantaneously. He was back in the absolute razor-sharp focus of an elite special operator facing a critical hostage rescue scenario. "I am on my way. Do not move from the school." "I am bringing Tuesday," Jake commanded, his voice a low, terrifyingly calm rumble of absolute authority that brokered no argument. He dropped his trowel, sprinted to his truck, and threw the passenger door open. Tuesday, despite his stiff hips and advanced age, somehow sensed the immense gravity of the situation. The old German shepherd didn't need to be coaxed. He leapt into the cab with a surprising burst of youthful agility, his amber eyes instantly locked onto Jake's intense face. When Jake's truck violently skidded to a halt in the school parking lot minutes later, he didn't bother speaking to the local police. He grabbed a heavy coil of tactical rope and a high-powered flashlight from his trunk, clipped a heavy-duty lead to Tuesday's collar, and marched straight to Sarah. He pulled her into a brief, bone-crushing hug. "I will bring our girl back, Sarah. I swear on my life," he whispered fiercely into her wet hair. And then he and the old war dog plunged directly into the dark, punishing wall of the forest. The Whispering Woods were a chaotic, disorienting nightmare of whipping branches, blinding rain, and knee-deep freezing mud. But Lieutenant Jake Vance navigated the treacherous terrain with the deadly, silent precision of a man who had tracked high-value targets through much worse jungles. He completely tuned out the cold, intensely focusing his highly trained eyes on tiny, almost imperceptible anomalies in the environment. A snapped fern frond, a slightly displaced patch of wet leaves, a tiny scuff mark on a protruding tree root. However, the heavy rain was rapidly destroying the visual trail. Jake unclipped the leash, kneeling in the mud to look Tuesday directly in the eyes. "Find her, buddy. Find Lily. You have to find our girl," Jake ordered, his voice echoing with a desperate, raw edge. The old German shepherd let out a low, determined growl, dropping his graying muzzle straight to the muddy forest floor. Tuesday systematically began to sweep the area, his experienced nose working furiously to separate the scent of wet earth and pine from the familiar, sweet smell of his tiny owner. For 40 agonizing minutes, they pushed deeper into the ravine, the fading afternoon light making the woods incredibly dark and menacing. Suddenly, Tuesday let out a sharp, urgent bark that cut through the sound of the torrential rain, instantly breaking into a stiff but determined run toward the edge of a steep embankment. Jake sprinted right behind him, his boots sliding dangerously in the mud. At the bottom of the embankment was a swollen, rapidly moving creek that had been transformed into a violent, churning river of freezing brown water by the sudden storm. Tuesday was standing frantically at the slippery edge, barking at a tiny bright pink plastic hairpin half buried in the mud. Jake's heart hammered violently against his ribs. He snapped his high-powered flashlight on, sweeping the blinding white beam across the turbulent water to the opposite bank. There, clinging desperately to a slick, muddy root protruding from the eroded shoreline, was Lily. She was completely soaked, shivering violently and crying silently, her small boots sliding dangerously close to the rushing water. "Lily, hold on." Jake roared over the sound of the creek, preparing to secure his tactical rope to a nearby tree. But before he could tie the knot, the muddy root beneath Lily's tiny hands gave a sickening snap. The little girl screamed as she plunged directly into the freezing, turbulent, fast-flowing water, instantly being swept downstream. Jake didn't hesitate for a microsecond. He didn't think about the freezing temperature or the hidden rocks. He dove headfirst off the embankment, hitting the freezing water with a massive splash. The current was incredibly powerful, instantly trying to drag his heavy, muscular frame under. But Jake fought the violent river with the sheer, unmatched desperation of a father saving his child. He propelled himself diagonally across the rushing current, his powerful arms slicing through the freezing water until he violently grabbed the collar of Lily's pink jacket just before she went under a submerged log. He pulled her tiny, freezing body fiercely against his chest, wrapping his massive arms around her, and kicked backward with all his remaining strength, slamming heavily into the muddy bank on their side of the creek. Jake dragged them both out of the water, collapsing onto the mud, and instantly ripping off his own dry inner thermal shirt to wrap the hysterical, freezing little girl. Tuesday was immediately there, whining and frantically licking Lily's pale face as she sobbed uncontrollably into Jake's chest. "I've got you, baby girl. I've got you. You are never, ever going to be alone," Jake murmured fiercely, rocking her tiny, shivering frame against his solid chest in the freezing rain, knowing with absolute certainty that no matter what anyone at that school said, he was already her father in every way that truly mattered. The brightly lit gymnasium of Oak Creek Elementary School was a chaotic symphony of folding chairs scraping against polished hardwood floors, the over-enthusiastic chatter of proud parents, and the restless energy of elementary students hopped up on stale fruit punch and sugar cookies. It was the highly anticipated Family Day, an event that had caused 7-year-old Lily so much heartache just a few weeks prior. Now, she stood near the entrance holding her mother's hand, wearing her favorite sparkly pink dress and a massive, gap-toothed smile that practically lit up the entire room. Sarah, dressed in a soft yellow sundress that perfectly complemented the newly returned warmth in her dark eyes, squeezed her daughter's hand nervously as they waited by the double doors. The gym was filled with various fathers showing off their ties and mothers holding up smartphones to record every mundane moment. Across the room, Tommy, a hulking fifth-grade bully with a perpetually smug expression, was standing with his father, a loud, red-faced man in a tight polo shirt who was currently talking over the school principal. Tommy caught Lily's eye and offered a familiar, mean-spirited smirk, clearly expecting her to shrink away in embarrassment because she didn't have a father to present to the class. However, Lily didn't shrink. Instead, her bright blue eyes locked onto the gymnasium doors as they swung open with a heavy, dramatic thud, completely silencing the immediate vicinity. Walking through the entrance was Lieutenant Jake Vance, a towering, broad-shouldered Navy SEAL who looked like he had been chiseled out of absolute granite. He was not wearing his usual civilian flannel or his mud-stained tactical gear. Today, Jake was dressed in his immaculate, razor-sharp, navy dress blue uniform. The pristine, dark fabric stretched tightly across his muscular chest, which was heavily decorated with rows of gleaming, hard-earned medals and ribbons that caught the harsh fluorescent light. Walking perfectly in step right beside his polished black shoes was Tuesday. The aging, graying German shepherd held his large head high, exuding a dignified military bearing that commanded instant respect, completely unbothered by the fact that Sarah had lovingly tied a rather large, crisp blue bow tie around his thick neck. The loud, chaotic chatter in the gymnasium instantly died down to a series of awestruck whispers as the formidable soldier and his loyal canine companion confidently strode across the floor. Jake didn't even glance at the staring parents. His intense green eyes were completely focused on Lily. When he reached her, he offered a sharp, perfectly executed military salute, causing the little girl to giggle uncontrollably before she threw her tiny arms around his waist. "Ready for our presentation, kiddo?" Jake asked, his deep, gravelly voice carrying a warmth that instantly melted Sarah's heart. "Ready, Dad." Lily beamed, the words slipping out so naturally that it made Jake's breath hitch in his throat for a fraction of a second before he smiled back, placing a large, protective hand on her small shoulder. When Ms. Gable, a kind-hearted teacher with round, wire-rimmed glasses and a remarkably patient smile, called Lily's family up to the small wooden stage at the front of the room, the entire gymnasium fell completely silent. Tommy and his father suddenly looked incredibly small and insignificant in their folding chairs. Jake stood tall at the microphone, completely dwarfing the podium, with Lily holding his left hand and Tuesday sitting obediently at his right side. "Good morning," Jake began, his commanding voice easily projecting to the back of the room without even needing the microphone. "My name is Lieutenant Jake Vance. I'm here today with Lily, her mother Sarah, and this incredibly stubborn old war dog named Tuesday. Lily was asked to bring someone to talk about family and heroes. I am not the hero of this story. The real hero is a man named Mark, a goofy blonde Navy SEAL who was Lily's father and the bravest man I ever had the absolute honor of serving beside." Jake paused, his gaze sweeping over the audience, specifically locking eyes with Tommy for a brief, terrifying second that made the bully visibly gulp, shrink down in his seat, and stare intensely at his own sneakers. Jake continued, his tone shifting from a commanding boom to a profound emotional sincerity that captured every single person in the room. "Mark loved his family more than breathing. When he didn't come home from our last deployment, it broke our world. I was lost. I was a broken soldier hiding in the dark. But then I met Tuesday. Every single week, this loyal dog would march to the edge of the military base with a blue canvas bag locked in his teeth. He was carrying Lily's letters, trying to deliver them to a father in heaven. Tuesday taught me what absolute, unbreakable loyalty looks like." The gymnasium was dead silent, save for the sound of several parents openly sniffing and desperately reaching for tissues. And then I met Lily. This little girl, who had every reason in the world to be angry, showed me what true courage is. Courage isn't just jumping out of helicopters or fighting bad guys in the desert. Courage is keeping your heart open when it's been shattered. Courage is a 7-year-old girl who smiled at a giant, scary, ruined soldier and decided he was her new best friend. Lily and Sarah saved my life. They pulled me out of the dark. So, if you want to know what a real family looks like, it looks like this. A brave little girl, a fiercely strong mother, a fiercely loyal dog, and a very lucky guy who gets to stand beside them. When Jake finished speaking, there was a moment of absolute stillness before the entire room erupted into a massive, deafening round of applause. Parents stood up, cheering loudly. Lily beamed with unimaginable pride, holding her head high, completely victorious. Tommy the bully sat rigidly in his chair, his face burning bright red with absolute shame, thoroughly defeated by the undeniable towering presence of genuine honor and love. The triumphant energy of the school event carried them all the way back to their quiet suburban street. The afternoon sun cast a warm golden glow over the small house with the newly repaired roof, creating a picture of absolute, hard-won domestic peace. Jake had loosened the tight collar of his dress uniform, sitting comfortably on the floral sofa with his strong arm securely wrapped around Sarah's waist, listening to Lily excitedly recount every single compliment she had received from her classmates. It was in this quiet, perfect moment that Tuesday slowly got up from his spot on the braided rug. The aging German shepherd stretched his stiff hips with a soft groan and walked over to the corner of the room where the old, frayed blue canvas bag sat. Since Jake had entered their lives, the bag had remained untouched, a silent relic of a painful past. Tuesday carefully opened his jaws, gently gripping the worn fabric strap in his teeth one last time. He didn't head for the front door to march to the base. Instead, the old dog walked slowly and deliberately down the narrow hallway and straight into Lily's brightly painted bedroom. Jake, Sarah, and Lily fell silent, watching intently from the doorway. Tuesday walked over to Lily's small bed, lowered his heavy head, and used his wet nose to firmly push the torn blue bag deep underneath the bed frame, pushing it completely out of sight into the shadows. His long, impossible mission was officially over. The letters didn't need to go to heaven anymore, because heaven had sent them an angel to stay. Tuesday let out a long, shuddering breath that sounded remarkably like a sigh of absolute relief. He turned around, walked slowly back to the living room, and collapsed heavily onto the floor right at Jake's feet. The old war dog rested his graying, dignified chin firmly onto Jake's polished black shoe, closing his amber eyes for a deep, incredibly peaceful sleep. Jake reached down, his large, calloused hand gently stroking the dog's soft ears, while his other arm pulled Sarah and Lily closer against his broad chest. A painful, harrowing chapter of their lives had officially closed forever, making way for a beautiful new beginning. Jake Vance, the lonely soldier who had lost his brother in arms, had finally found his true mission, surrounded by the unbreakable love of Sarah, Lily, and the most faithful postman in the entire world. Tuesday, the loyal German shepherd, showed us that love transcends even the boundaries of life and death. His unwavering dedication not only delivered a little girl's messages to heaven, but also guided a broken, grieving soldier back into the light. From Jake's perspective, this story is a powerful reminder that we are never truly alone in our darkest hours. Sometimes, the family we choose, or the ones who choose us, whether they have 2 legs or 4, can be the very grace that saves our souls. Love and loyalty have the miraculous power to bridge the gap between profound loss and beautiful new beginnings. May God bless you and your loved ones with the same profound peace, unbreakable love, and unwavering loyalty that Jake, Sarah, Lily, and Tuesday found in each other. May He watch over you, protect your family, and bring a guiding light into your life during difficult times. If you believe that God's grace can heal any broken heart and bring hope to the lost, please type Amen in the comments below. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the incredible power of love, please gently share this video with someone who might need a message of hope today. Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring, heartwarming stories. May you always find your way home.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Remember, even in the darkest times, there's always a light. Stay strong, stay hopeful, and I will see you in the next story.